Yeah, I mean, I think the question I try to ask myself is that was it obvious before the investment was made that this was a possible failure point and a significant failure point, and not something obscure, just headlights front and center. And so like if you look at Dexter shoes, you know, can the business be decimated by cheap foreign competition? That's a question on the checklist. When I looked at Longleaf Partners and the investment in GM, they had a lot of commentary when they owned the stock at the time when they're bullish on the stock, and they were bullish because the big three automakers in the U.S. dominated the truck business, and they still do. They dominated it at a time Longleaf owned it, and they still dominate truck. In fact, they dominated it in a very incredible way. And those trucks actually are just cash cows. I think these guys are making like $10,000 a truck. It's very high profit margins on those trucks, and so that's a great franchise. And Longleaf focused on the power of the franchise, and they were right. The trucks have a great franchise, but there's other layers in that business: the unions, the labor relations, the high capex nature, and those should have been major red flags. And of course, one of the things that happened with GM post bankruptcy is that Detroit used to be one of the worst places on the planet to build a car in, let's say, 2003 to 2007, for example. Very high labor costs and all these very highly inflexible labor. In fact, labor was not a variable input into manufacturing in US autos. It was a fixed cost. So if GM and Ford did not need a worker, the UAW contracts required them to pay them full pay while they sat at home. And full pay was, with benefits approaching $60, $70 an hour. So, how do you compete against people who are making $5 a day with those sorts of labor costs? And so, in the case of Longleaf, to me, it was obvious that the main thing you should have focused on there, or they should have focused on there, would have been the issues related to labor and capital intensity and such. And of course, then the big three had other problems with quality and other things with their non-truck offerings. So these are, and I don't want to beat up on Longleaf. I'm just using that as an example. I think they're exceptional investors. But these are just some examples that stood out. And in many cases, when investors made mistakes, we couldn't tell. I couldn't tell what the failure point was. So we, just like when Baupost makes an investment in some pharmaceutical company, I can't figure out why. And so if they lose money, I also can't figure out why. And that's fine. You don't need to know all of them. But we were doing the checklist. We needed to just understand enough to build a decent list.